This city is famous for being the global epicenter of culture, art, literature, and architecture. And when we talk about Paris, one unlikely name pops up over and over again: the American author Ernest Hemingway. Although Hemingway lived and traveled all over the world, perhaps no other city is as associated with him as much as Paris. Today, I'm gonna visit all of his old haunts. We'll see the bars he drank at, the cafés where he wrote, the places that inspired him to write, and we're gonna try to find out why this city had such a huge impact on him. But first, let's talk about what even brought him to Paris to begin with. Ernest Hemingway was born in 1899 in Oak Park, Illinois, a suburb just outside Chicago. He came from a family that put a strong emphasis on traditional values. Growing up, he spent most of his summers hunting and fishing at the family cabin up in Michigan. But by the time Ernest graduated from high school, the First World War was raging across Europe. Not being able to sit idly by, Hemingway volunteered as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross on the Italian front. While attending to the front lines, he was seriously wounded in a mortar attack. After recovering at a hospital in Milan, he returned to the US, where he then met Hadley Richardson. The two were married in 1921. The young couple could have easily settled into a routine and comfortable life in Chicago, but they were yearning for something more, so they set their sights on Europe. Ernest's friend, the author Sherwood Anderson, convinced them that Paris was the best place to be an aspiring young writer. Ernest was then able to secure a job as a foreign correspondent for the Toronto Star, and so they packed their bags and moved to Paris. I'm here in the Hotel d'Angleterre, and this is where Hemingway and his first wife Hadley first stayed when they arrived in Paris in 1921. They stayed here for a month, and these days they actually have a suite named after him. It's room 14 where he stayed. The couple got adjusted to Paris here at the hotel, but eventually they needed to find a more permanent residence. Ernest and Hadley eventually settled into a small apartment here on 74 Rue de Cardinal Lemon. Their apartment was just 2 small rooms with a shared toilet and a staircase landing. There was a dance hall below whose music they used to hear, and right outside there's a plaque that actually commemorates their stay here. And right below, there's a place called, it just says Under Hemingway. The sign's a little bit ripped up, but there's a cafe. It has like kebab and all this other stuff. I don't know if it's the most Parisian place, but they're definitely capitalizing on the Hemingway lore at this location. Just around the corner is a small restaurant called Le Maison de Verlaine, and there's a plaque outside saying that Hemingway lived here. This is only partially true. In fact, he never lived here, but he did rent a small writing studio in the hotel in this building where he wrote his early journalism. And this hotel was famous for the legendary French poet Paul Verlaine actually died here. Now the restaurant is named after him. So it was here at the apartment of author Gertrude Stein that Hemingway first got plugged into the literary scene here in Paris. Stein's salons were legendary, and here Hemingway mingled and drank with some of the most famous writers and artists of his day. Picasso and Matisse paintings hung on her wall, and she sometimes even entertained those artists themselves at her legendary get-togethers. She served as kind of a maternal figure to many of the young writers in town, and she famously gave this troupe of young artists and writers the collective name, the Génération Perdue, or the Lost Generation. Hemingway then quoted her in the epigraph for his first novel, The Sun Also Rises, and the name has stuck to this day, the Lost Generation.
In that fabulous era when this great romantic city became for Americans both the playground and cultural center of the world.
You see, 1920s Paris was a hotbed of artistic and literary talent. Aspiring artists from all over the world flocked to this Eden. And with the help of Gertrude Stein, Hemingway's circle soon grew to include titans of art and literature such as Ezra Pound, James Joyce, John Dos Passos, Pablo Picasso, Henri Matisse, Ford Madox Ford, Man Ray, T.S. Eliot, and even Josephine Baker. But it's his friendship with F. Scott Fitzgerald that most people remember from this time period. The two of them became synonymous with Paris in the 1920s, and they met for the very first time right here at this spot. It used to be called Dingo Bar. Now it's called Le Berge de Venise, an Italian restaurant. Fitzgerald's masterpiece, The Great Gatsby, had just been published a few weeks earlier to great acclaim, and he was on top of the world. Hemingway was a rising star at the time. He was not yet the Hemingway that we got to know. Inside the bar, they celebrate the meeting of this legendary duo. A plaque even hangs to honor the event at this historic Parisian bar. And some street art on the wall outside even commemorates Fitzgerald and his legacy here. And right across the street, of course, you have Les Scott Bar, after Scott Fitzgerald. Speaking of F. Scott Fitzgerald, he and his wife Zelda lived right here. Today, a plaque honors them, and Scott and Ernest were really close friends in the beginning. They eventually had a falling out, but they both had Midwestern roots and found themselves at the top of the literary pyramid here in Paris and had a huge influence on each other. We're here in the heart of the neighborhood of Montparnasse, which is a place where Hemingway spent a lot of time. The bars, cafés, and brasseries here were traditionally a meeting place for artists and writers of Paris. And Hemingway quickly became a preeminent fixture of the left bank crowd here.
They seek the new sensations, the new thrills Paris is famous for, and Paris does her best to provide them.
Behind me is a cafe called La Causerie des Lilas. In Hemingway's memoirs, he actually mentions this cafe a whopping 32 times. I checked it out. It's even in one of the chapter titles. He would come here and scribble away at his notebooks, and he even edited much of The Sun Also Rises at these tables. He and Fitzgerald would sit here and talk about the craft of writing for hours on end. This classic Parisian eatery opened in 1845, more than 70 years before Hemingway even arrived in Paris. And I can see why I loved it. The lush decor, the green, the outdoor seating. It's relaxed and quiet, yet full of life at the same time. Among its many famous patrons, they celebrate Hemingway with a very French spelling of his name. On the menu, they even have something called a pan-fried filet of beef, Hemingway style. And on their website, they even call it Le Bar Hemingway. Among the many photos they feature, there's a French copy of A Movable Feast with the cafe's name on it. They certainly haven't forgotten about Hemingway here. Right here we have Le Dôme Cafe, and it was a place that artists and writers always hung out. You had people like Chagall, Modigliani, Henry Miller dined here. This luxurious and cozy cafe first opened in 1898 and instantly became a meeting place for literary types. Not only did Hemingway mention this cafe in 3 of his books, but it's even mentioned in a chapter title. And despite the many illustrious clientele, only one of them has a special selection on the menu today. Just across the street, we have Café de la Rotonde. This place, which opened in 1911, was a traditional hangout for bohemian artists and literary figures. It was also frequented by people like Picasso, Gershwin, and even Trotsky. Like the others, Hemingway was a regular here. In The Sun Also Rises, Hemingway's character, Jake Barnes, even explains that no matter what cafe in Montparnasse he asks a taxi driver to bring you to from the right bank of the river, they always take you to the Rotonde. When you think about why Paris fostered such creative talents, I think the cafe scene can be really crucial. There's a certain je ne sais quoi in the air. People are out meeting each other. They would share a coffee, wine, or a cognac. It was a social place where you could bump into anyone and go have a drink. And this place, La Cupola, is no exception. This is another one of Hemingway's favorites right here in Montparnasse. Like the other bars, the list of well-known clientele goes on and on. This Art Deco bar first opened in 1927, towards the end of Hemingway's first stint here, but he quickly took to it, and he always returned on subsequent visits. Right across the street from La Cupola, we have Le Select, which was another staple of the left bank crowd during this time. Le Select first opened in 1923. In The Sun Also Rises, Ernest mentions this bar 11 times. And today, not only is he listed on their website, but they have a cocktail named in his honor, the Hemingway Sour. In A Movable Feast, Hemingway lists off all the bars we just visited as the center of Montparnasse. It's all right here in this one neighborhood. This is the place right here. Right across the river from Notre Dame, we're gonna meet one of my favorite people that Hemingway rubbed elbows with during his time in Paris. Sylvia Beach, ran an English language bookshop called Shakespeare and Company.
Shakespeare and Company, gathering place to the literary exiles. Poet Stephen Vincent Benet is an early visitor to Sylvia Beach's bookshop. Another is novelist Ernest Hemingway.
This is the present location, but not where it was located in Hemingway's time. Unfortunately, they don't allow pictures or videos inside, and I'm gonna respect their wishes, but it is an amazing place. It's this cavernous bookstore with everything you can imagine inside. Let's take a quick walk to the original location. We're here at 12 Rue de l'Odéon, where Hemingway and his cadre of expat writers would gather and borrow English language books from Sylvia's shop. Hemingway tells us that even when he didn't have any money, she let him borrow any books he wanted from the lending library for free and pay when he could. Irish writer James Joyce was struggling to publish his book Ulysses, and Sylvia even reached into her own pockets and paid for the publication with her own money. Unfortunately, she had to close her doors in 1941 during the Second World War, but today a plaque outside still honors her shop. We're here at one of my favorite places in all of Paris, the serene and grand Luxembourg Gardens. Hemingway would walk here for countless hours for inspiration. He'd stroll through the grounds and pay attention to every little detail, and it's very easy to understand how a place like this could inspire you to write great works of literature. This place just abounds with people meeting each other and beautiful scenes everywhere. Afterwards, he would go to the Luxembourg Museum and study the paintings of Cézanne for inspiration. The Luxembourg Museum first opened in 1750 and housed contemporary art. It was way ahead of its time. Now most of the paintings that Hemingway would have seen and admired are hanging in the Musée d'Orsay, but it's still an incredible place to visit. We're here at the Musée d'Orsay to see some of the paintings that inspired Hemingway to write. He was obsessed with art, not just in a way that would make you seem cultured or refined, but he consumed it voraciously. He spent so much time wandering through museums, studying it. Here at the Orsay, they have an awesome collection, so let's go see some. Hemingway was a lover of all art, but it's safe to say that he was a bit obsessed with Cézanne. He insisted that Cézanne's paintings taught him to write better. He wrote about it in A Movable Feast over and over. He even spoke about it in a famous Lillian Ross profile in The New Yorker years later. Maybe it was the simple brushstrokes that inspired Hemingway's sparse prose. He was inspired by the way Cézanne used unadorned landscapes to set a scene, and even stated, "I learned how to make a landscape from Mr. Paul Cézanne." Impressionism was about rendering a subjective snapshot of reality as caught in a moment's glance, something that Hemingway tried to do with his writing. Here at the Orsay, they have an excellent collection of other Impressionist painters today, which no doubt Hemingway would appreciate. When Hadley became pregnant, the couple moved to Toronto briefly, where Hadley gave birth to their son Bumby, but they soon found themselves back in Paris. They moved to this apartment, which during their time was above a sawmill. By this time, Hemingway had left his job as a journalist and was devoted full-time to becoming an author. He published a collection of short stories called In Our Time, and soon he would publish his first novel, The Sun Also Rises, which catapulted him to fame. There's another cluster of restaurants in an area called Saint-Germain-des-Prés that Hemingway used to frequent, and as you can see, he really enjoyed his life here in Paris, so we're gonna take a look at a few of them right now. So I'm here at Les Deux Magots, another one of Hemingway's favorite cafes in the area. Poets like Verlaine and Rimbaud used to dine here. Since its inception, it's been the hangout for writers and artists. This place first opened in 1812 as a silk and novelty store. Then in 1884, it turned into a bar and cafe. These days, they've even expanded internationally to places like Tokyo, Riyadh, and Sao Paulo. On their website, they list 7 different artists and writers who used to come to the cafe, and Hemingway is the only non-French name on the list. On the menu, they even offer Le Petit Déjeuner Hemingway, or the Hemingway Breakfast. In A Movable Feast, Hemingway even writes about meeting James Joyce there and drinking dry sherry together. It's the kind of bar where old men are reading newspapers, and it has a really charming vibe and a nice outdoor seating area. I can see why Hemingway loved it. I'm here outside Café de Flore. This is another favorite Hemingway hangout here in Paris. These days it's become very popular. It's very Instagrammable, and there are people taking photos outside, and there's a long line of people to go inside. This cafe first opened in the 1880s, and while today it might seem like a bit of a tourist trap, it's always been a hangout of the literary elites. Although, unlike Le Deux Magots, it was a bit more bourgeois. Yeah, after seeing that line over there, no thank you. Behind me is Brasserie Lip, which is another one of Hemingway's favorite places. He mentions it in A Movable Feast as a place that he would come whenever he had money. He sets a scene here, and he even reflects on his time in Paris. Behind me is a spot called Le Comptoir des Saint-Pères. But back in Hemingway's time, this was the legendary Michaud's. And for Hemingway, it was a special treat to celebrate something once in a while. But of course, once he became famous, he came here more often. On the menu, they even have a cocktail named after Hemingway.
Choo-choo!
Merci beaucoup.
Coming up!
Just down the street, we have another picturesque cafe, Le Pré-à-Cleux, which is another one of his hangouts here. Inside the cafe, they have a whole shelf of books by and about Hemingway. They certainly haven't forgotten about him here. With the publication of his first novel, Ernest skyrocketed to international fame. Everything seemed to be going great for the young writer, but trouble was brewing behind the scenes. You see, Hemingway had fallen in love with another woman named Pauline Pfeiffer. After much internal conflict, Ernest and Hadley divorced in 1927, and soon thereafter, Ernest married Pauline, his second of 4 eventual wives. And that actually brings us to Hemingway's third Paris apartment, where he and Pauline moved in 1927, here on 6 Rue Ferraud, near the Luxembourg Gardens. It was a lot more luxurious compared to previous residences. Not only was he now like an established author, but Pauline came from money, and they knew how to enjoy it. Just around the corner from this apartment sits the Saint-Sulpice Church. Hemingway was born into a Protestant family, but he converted to Catholicism when he married Pauline, who was herself a practicing Catholic. He and Pauline would come to Mass right here at Saint-Sulpice, and it's easy to see why. We've now crossed the Seine to the more posh right bank. We're going to see some of the fancier places that Hemingway hung out. You see, all Paris is divided in 2 parts, the left and the right bank of the Seine. On the left, you had an avant-garde up-and-coming crowd, but here on the right bank was the posh upscale living that Hemingway aspired to in his early days, and he eventually embraced as his stature and acclaim grew. This is called the Hotel des Crayons. Hemingway explained that when he had money, he came to the bar here. He mentions this hotel 6 times in The Sun Also Rises, including the scene where Jake writes a letter on their stationery while he waits for Lady Brett Astley, who never shows up in the end. The concierge was kind enough to show me around the extravagant lobby and dining area, and it didn't disappoint. Right behind me is Harry's New York Bar, which is a legendary place with a wild story. It was actually founded in 1911 when they dismantled and shipped an entire bar from New York to this location. George Gershwin actually composed An American in Paris right here in this bar. The bar lays claim to the Bloody Mary and the sidecar. They were both invented here in this bar, and it's no wonder that it was one of Hemingway's favorite places to drink. Right across here, we have Café de la Paix. It's right next to the opera over there and is a traditional stop before shows. I'm honestly running out of ways to say Ernest drank here, Ernest hung out here. He just was at so many places, and so many places claim him as a patron. Behind me is the Ritz Paris. What hotel evokes more lustrous imagery than this? Just the name, Ritz. Nowadays, it's a worldwide chain, but this one right here was opened in 1898 by Caesar Ritz, and to this day ranks among the best and most luxurious hotels in the world. In his early days, Hemingway was more interested in the bar here. Although he couldn't afford to come here frequently, over the years he returned often. 20 years later, Hemingway was serving as a war journalist during the Second World War when he rode in with the Allied troops as they liberated Paris. Hemingway famously exclaimed that he was there to liberate some of the champagne from their wine cellar. This is possibly one of the most famous hotels in the world, with famous clientele and dignitaries, actors, everyone alike. And would you believe that today the bar is called Bar Hemingway? The interior of this fancy cocktail bar is even decked out in Hemingway memorabilia. And even the menu is called the Hemingway Star and has a wide selection of Hemingway-inspired cocktails. You couldn't have a more fitting homage to a man who so adored this hotel and this city. It's clear that Paris left a huge imprint on Hemingway, from rubbing elbows with established authors to his walks in the Luxembourg Gardens. This place forged Hemingway into the juggernaut he would eventually become. Parisians are not the most famous for being welcoming to outsiders, and yet, throughout the city, there are dozens of plaques, photos, cocktails, and dishes named after Hemingway. He left a deep and lasting legacy that prevails to this day. This American author infiltrated Paris and got them to embrace him. And that's the true miracle of Hemingway.